I put my grandson through law school. Then he tried to put me in a nursing home. So I made him pay every penny back. Y'all about to witness how a 73-year-old school teacher taught the most important lesson of her life. If you're watching this, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. The Cadillac pulled into my driveway right on time. Marcus always was punctual, even as a child. I smoothed down my navy dress, the one with the gold buttons he'd given me last Christmas, and checked my lipstick one last time. Dinner at my grandson's new house in Lincoln Park. 10 years into his fancy law career, and still the sight of his success made my chest swell with pride. "Grandma Elle, you look amazing," he called, helping me into the passenger seat. His cologne was expensive, his watch even more so. "You don't look so bad yourself, counselor," I replied, patting his clean-shaven face. "Must be doing something right at that firm of yours." The drive was filled with his talk of cases and clients, names that meant nothing to me, but clearly meant everything in his world. I mostly nodded, watching Chicago's South Side fade into downtown high-rises, then into the tree-lined streets of his neighborhood. His house looked like something from those magazines at the beauty parlor, all clean lines and gleaming surfaces. Standing in his marble foyer, I felt suddenly aware of my sensible shoes and the slight tremor in my right hand. "Eleanor, so wonderful to finally meet Marcus's grandmother." A tall white man with silver hair approached, hand extended. "I'm Richard Kensington, senior partner." Before I could respond, Marcus's arm slid around my shoulders. "Grandma's been so excited to meet everyone. Though we might need to get her home before it gets too late. She gets confused in the evenings sometimes." I frowned. "I don't get confused. And this is my wife, Stephanie," Richard continued, as a blonde woman joined us. During dinner, I began telling them about Marcus's first debate competition. How at 12 years old, he'd stood up against kids from the private schools and won. "Actually, Grandma," Marcus interrupted, his smile tight, "that was a mock trial competition, not debate. And I was 14, not 12. No. Baby, I remember it, clear as day. Your birthday had just—" "Grandma gets her stories mixed up sometimes," he said to the table, not to me. "Don't you, Grandma?" Everyone laughed politely. I felt heat rising up my neck, but smiled through it. When I mentioned putting him through law school, Marcus smoothly changed the subject, pouring more wine for everyone except me. After dinner, I excused myself to use the restroom. On my way back, I paused in the hallway when I heard my name. "Yes, she's starting to forget things," Marcus was saying. "I'm concerned about how long she can live alone. These old houses in Southside aren't equipped for elderly care." "Have you looked into facilities?" Richard asked. "Several. There's a place in Oak Park that has an opening next month." My hand flew to my chest. The room seemed to tilt. I steadied myself against the wall, breathing deep to push down the sting of betrayal. I rejoined them with a practiced smile, the one I'd perfected during 40 years of teaching when parents would question my methods or principals would undermine my authority. On the drive home, I sat silently, watching my grandson's profile in the glow of streetlights. When had the little boy who used to fall asleep in my lap while I graded papers turned into this stranger? That night, alone in my house that had sheltered 3 generations of Washingtons, I pulled out the old photo albums. Each page told the story of sacrifice, second jobs, skipped vacations, delayed dreams, all so Marcus could become the man he was today. A man who was now planning to put me away. The day Jasmine died, part of me went with her. My beautiful daughter, just 24, taken by a cancer that moved faster than the doctors could chase it. She left behind her 5-year-old son, Marcus, and me, a 43-year-old widow with a heart full of grief and a new purpose. That night, I rocked Marcus to sleep while he asked questions I couldn't answer. "When's Mommy coming back? Why did she go to heaven without us?" I was already raising him half the time anyway. His daddy vanished the minute Jasmine's pregnancy test showed positive. Robert, my husband, had been gone 6 years by then. A truck accident took him in an instant. He left me some rental properties, a modest life insurance policy, and dreams we'd planned to chase together once I retired from teaching. I worked 2 schools, my regular position at Douglas High and evening classes at Malcolm X College. Weekends, I tutored rich kids from the North Side whose parents paid triple my hourly teaching wage. Every extra dollar went into Marcus's college fund. When his acceptance letter from Northwestern Law arrived, we danced around the kitchen. "We did it, Grandma," he shouted, lifting me off my feet. You did it, I corrected him. I just helped clear the path. The truth was messier. Northwestern cost more than I'd saved. So at 56, I remortgaged my paid-off house rather than liquidate investments that were finally growing after decades of careful nurturing. The changes came gradually after graduation. First, it was missed Sunday calls, then shorter visits, new friends, new clothes, new accent that sounded less South Side, more downtown. I told myself this was normal. Success changes people's circumstances, doesn't have to change their hearts. But sitting in my living room 30 years after taking him in, staring at the mortgage statement I was still paying off at 73, I wondered if Marcus's heart had changed after all. The next morning, I called Dr. Williams for an appointment. If Marcus thought I was losing my mind, I needed to know if there was any truth to it. Blood pressure's good. Reflexes normal. Dr. Williams shined a light in my eyes. How's the memory, Eleanor? I forget where I put my glasses sometimes, usually when they're on top of my head. I joked. He didn't laugh. Marcus called my office yesterday. Said you've been repeating stories, missing appointments, getting confused about medications. My smile fell. That's not true. I take my pressure pills every morning with breakfast. Never missed one. Dr. Williams nodded, making notes. And your daily activities? Cooking, cleaning, managing finances? I made cornbread from scratch last night. My checkbook balances to the penny. And I just finished organizing the church's annual fundraiser. I leaned forward. James, you've known me 40 years. Do I seem impaired to you? He looked up from his clipboard. You seem like the same sharp Eleanor Washington who taught my daughter algebra. Some normal age-related memory changes, nothing concerning. As I was leaving, Marcus appeared in the waiting room, as if summoned by our conversation. Sorry I'm late. He strode in, all confidence in his tailored suit. Important client meeting ran long. What's the verdict, doctor? On the drive home, Marcus outlined his plan. Touring facilities next week, meeting with his colleague who specializes in elder transitions, putting my house on the market before winter. I nodded along, but inside, a steel rod of determination was forming, the same one that had straightened my spine when Robert died, when Jasmine got sick, when I became a single grandmother raising a boy. That night, I called Bernadette. You were right, I said when she answered. We need to talk. What are these? Marcus? I asked, examining the papers he'd spread across my dining table. He'd arrived unannounced with a thin man named Peter Whitfield, introduced as a colleague specializing in elder transitions. Just some estate planning documents, Grandma. Power of attorney, healthcare directives, standard stuff. I noticed how he'd positioned himself so I couldn't see everything clearly. Mind if I read them first? Irritation flickered across his face. Of course not, but they're pretty dense. Legal jargon. I can explain the important parts. I taught advanced placement English for 30 years, Marcus. I can handle dense text. I smiled, taking the papers. I'll review them this week. It would be better to handle this now. Grandma, these things shouldn't wait. Just then, Bernadette happened to drop by with her famous sweet potato pie. Oh, I didn't realize you had company, she said, feigning surprise. Should I come back later? Nonsense, I replied. You know Marcus, and this is Mr. Whitfield, his colleague. Bernadette's eyes narrowed slightly. Well, I'm sure Eleanor has her own attorney looking these over, right, Ellie? Actually, Whitfield interjected, as Marcus's colleague, I'm providing these services as a courtesy. No need for additional attorneys to complicate matters. My nephew James is a lawyer, specializes in elder law. Coincidentally, maybe he should take a look. That's really not necessary, Marcus said quickly. These are standard documents. I pretended to consider this. Actually, having a second pair of eyes might be helpful. Legal documents can be so confusing at my age. After they left, Bernadette turned to me. Those vultures! What exactly are they trying to get you to sign? The next day, James Carter arrived, a serious young man with his aunt's shrewd eyes and a briefcase worn at the corners. Miss Bernadette explained your situation, he said, after we'd exchanged pleasantries. May I see the documents they left? As he read, his expression darkened. Mrs. Washington, these aren't standard estate planning documents. This is a petition for guardianship, essentially declaring you incompetent. And this, he held up another paper, would grant Marcus durable power of attorney with no oversight or reporting requirements. What does that mean in plain English? It means he could sell your house, access your bank accounts, make medical decisions, All without your consent or knowledge. James removed his glasses. If you'd signed these, you would have legally handed over control of your entire life. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the table. Mrs. Washington, has Marcus asked about your assets? Properties, investments, insurance policies? Not directly, but he's been hinting, asking if I've thought about what will happen to the house eventually. James nodded grimly. I've seen this before. Often there's financial pressure motivating these situations. Does Marcus have money problems that you know of? I thought about his expensive house, luxury car, designer suits. He lives very well, perhaps too well for even a successful attorney his age. I suggest we do some discreet investigating before confronting him. And in the meantime, we need to protect you legally. I stared at the documents that would have erased my autonomy with a few signatures. I don't want to destroy him, James. I just want to stop him from destroying himself. And me, in the process. I understand. James opened his briefcase. Let's start with a revocation of any existing powers of attorney. Then we'll create new documents that look similar to what Marcus presented, but with critical differences. As we worked through the paperwork, I felt a strange mix of heartbreak and resolve. The grandson I raised would never have done this. The man he'd become was a stranger wearing Marcus's face. These cameras are for your safety, Grandma, Marcus explained, directing the technician installing the security system. They'll alert me if you fall or if there's an intruder. I nodded, playing the role of the grateful, slightly confused elderly woman. That's very thoughtful, dear. Will they watch me in the bathroom too? I asked innocently. Marcus looked horrified. No, Grandma. Just the main areas, living room, kitchen, front door. If you say so. I shuffled around in my slippers, moving slower than necessary. Will I need to press buttons or anything complicated? Everything's automated. You don't need to do anything. After they left, James returned with his laptop. Let's see what Marcus has installed. He accessed the camera system using default passwords that Marcus hadn't bothered to change. Typical. He assumes you wouldn't understand technology enough to check. Can we see what they see? Better. We can control what they see. James typed commands. We can loop old footage when needed, so you can move normally when you're alone, but appear frail when he's watching. 2 days later, while I was at church, the cameras caught Marcus bringing a real estate agent through my house. The property has great potential, the agent said, measuring my living room. This whole area is gentrifying fast. The old lady should be in a facility within a month, Marcus replied. I want to list it immediately after. I watched the footage with James, my hands shaking with rage. That's my home. My husband built those bookshelves. My daughter took her first steps on that floor. Later that week, I accidentally answered Marcus's phone when it rang during one of his visits. Marcus Washington's office, I said automatically. This is creditor services regarding the overdue balance, a woman's voice stated crisply. Mr. Washington promised payment last week. I'm sorry, this is his grandmother. He stepped away. The woman hung up abruptly. That evening, I called Denise, my journalist former student. I need to know if a lawyer at Kensington and Reed might be having financial problems. Discreetly. Any particular lawyer? She asked carefully. My grandson. 3 days later, Denise met me for coffee. Marcus is in trouble, Miss Washington. Started small. Complaints from elderly clients about excessive fees. Then questions about financial transactions. The firm's keeping it quiet, but he's on thin ice. The next step was the hardest. I accepted Marcus's invitation to Sunday dinner at his home. While he was grilling on the patio, I excused myself to use the restroom, but went to his home office instead. Years of teaching had taught me to move silently. Catching students passing notes required stealth. I quickly examined the papers on his desk, taking photos with the small camera James had given me. What I found stole my breath. Documents showing Marcus had already sold 2 small rental properties I'd placed in an educational trust for neighborhood children. Properties I'd apparently signed over to him 3 years ago. When he'd presented papers he claimed were just administrative updates for the trust. I also found a glossy brochure from a development company with plans for luxury condos, mapped over the exact location of my house. As I slipped back to the bathroom, my hands trembling, I reminded myself that the boy I raised was still in there somewhere, but the man he'd become was capable of betraying me in ways I'd never imagined. That night, I prayed harder than I had since Jasmine's diagnosis, not for myself, but for Marcus, that whatever had twisted his heart might somehow be untwisted before it was too late. We have 3 options, James explained, as Bernadette poured tea in my kitchen. We can report Marcus to the authorities immediately for attempted fraud and elder abuse. We can confront him directly, or we can set a trap that might teach him a more lasting lesson. I don't want my grandson in jail, I said firmly, but I can't let this continue. Michael, my detective former student, leaned forward. The evidence we've gathered shows a pattern. The camera footage, the document manipulation, the financial records Denise uncovered. It's compelling. And troubling, James added. The properties he sold from your educational trust? That's criminal conversion at minimum. I stared at the photographs spread across my kitchen table, evidence of my grandson's betrayal. What kind of trap did you have in mind? James outlined a plan that would use Marcus's own tactics against him. We'll let him think he's winning, that you're beginning to accept the idea of assisted living and signing over control of your assets. We established a schedule of visits with friends who would witness my lucidity, created a detailed log of my daily activities, and set up regular check-ins with Dr. Williams, who documented my cognitive health. I spent a day with Bernadette's niece, who worked as a drama coach, practicing how to appear slightly disoriented without overacting. Subtle is better, she advised. Small hesitations, occasional word-finding difficulties, nothing dramatic. That night, alone in my bedroom, I pulled out the last letter Jasmine had written before she died. Take care of my boy, Mama, she'd written. Help him become a good man. I'm trying, baby, I whispered to her memory. I'm still trying. The next morning, I called Marcus. I've been thinking about what you said, I told him, my voice deliberately hesitant. About me not being able to manage alone much longer. Maybe you're right. His eager response confirmed everything. The trap was set. I've been organizing my papers, I told Marcus as he helped me into his car for our tour of Lakeside Gardens. The retirement community he'd selected. Found some things I'd forgotten about. What kind of things? He barely looked at me, checking his phone instead. Oh, some investment statements. Stock certificates from companies Robert bought into years ago. Did you know your grandfather had an eye for technology companies? Bought Apple stock in the 80s. That got his attention. Apple stock? You never mentioned that before. I waved dismissively. Probably not worth much now. Those computer companies come and go. Marcus's eyebrows shot up. Grandma, Apple is one of the most valuable companies in the world. As we drove, I continued dropping breadcrumbs about previously unmentioned assets. The African art collection Robert had started. Mineral rights to land in Louisiana his grandfather had owned. A small life insurance policy my mother had left me that I'd reinvested over decades. None of these were fabrications. They were assets I'd carefully managed, but never flaunted. My generation believed in quiet wealth, the kind that provided security without attracting attention. Marcus's driving became increasingly erratic as I spoke, his eyes darting between the road and my face. Why didn't you ever tell me about these things? He finally asked. You never asked, baby. And a woman in my position, well, people take advantage of elderly black women with money. I learned to be discreet. The irony hung thick between us, though only I recognized it. The whispers began as planned. Bernadette, accidentally, mentioned to her hairdresser, whose sister worked as a paralegal at a competing firm, that she was concerned about elderly clients being pressured to restructure their assets at Kensington and Reed. Denise published a general interest article about financial exploitation of seniors, citing anonymous cases that resembled Marcus's methods. The article was careful to avoid specifics that could identify him, but anyone familiar with his work would recognize the patterns. Meanwhile, I continued my performance of gradual acceptance. I allowed Marcus to drive me to doctor's appointments, asked his advice about financial matters, and appeared increasingly reliant on his guidance. James prepared the documents we needed, papers that appeared to give Marcus what he wanted while containing carefully crafted provisions that would actually protect me and potentially expose his actions if he abused his authority. Most lawyers skim documents they think they understand, James explained, especially when they believe they're in control of the situation. Marcus's overconfidence is our advantage. One evening, Marcus called with barely contained excitement. Grandma, I've been thinking about what you said regarding your investments. I'd like to introduce you to our firm's financial advisor. He specializes in helping clients your age protect their assets. 2 days later, Richard Kensington himself accompanied Marcus to my home. The senior partner rarely handled client meetings personally anymore, but the possibility of significant assets had clearly piqued his interest. Mrs. Washington, he said warmly, taking my hand between both of his. Marcus has told me so much about you. I understand you have quite the investment portfolio. I played my role perfectly, a slightly confused elderly woman with substantial assets and a declining grasp of their value. I mistakenly mentioned that some of the stock certificates were in my safe deposit box, others with my financial advisor, actually just stored in James's office. And the paintings? Kensington asked casually. Marcus mentioned an art collection? My husband collected works by black artists before they were fashionable, I explained. Jacob Lawrence, Romer Bearden, Elizabeth Catlett. Some are in storage, the valuable ones anyway. The men exchanged glances. I pretended not to notice. That weekend, I made my most public move yet. I donated $25,000 to the Elder Financial Protection Network, a substantial but not suspicious amount from someone of my means. I requested that the donation be announced at their annual luncheon, where I was invited to speak briefly about the importance of protecting seniors. I made sure Marcus heard about the event and urged him to attend to support my charitable interests. He couldn't refuse without seeming unsupportive. At the luncheon, I spoke eloquently about the wisdom elders accumulated and the unfortunate vulnerability that sometimes accompanied aging. Without mentioning specifics, I emphasized how even well-educated seniors could be manipulated by those they trusted most. Often the predator wears a familiar face, I said, looking directly at Marcus in the audience. They know your weaknesses, your fears, your trust. That's what makes this type of exploitation so devastating and so difficult to combat. Marcus sat stone-faced as attendees applauded enthusiastically. Several approached him afterward, congratulating him on having such an insightful grandmother and expressing how lucky I was to have a lawyer in the family looking out for my interests. He drove me home in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Did you enjoy the luncheon, dear? I asked innocently. It was fine. His voice was tight. Grandma, have you been talking to someone about me? About our discussions regarding your care? What do you mean, baby? Nothing. Never mind. He pulled into my driveway. I'll call you tomorrow about those papers. As he drove away, I knew the whispers were reaching him. The trap was nearly ready to spring. The official letter arrived on Marcus's embossed stationery, marked Confidential. Inside was a notice from the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission, informing him of a preliminary inquiry into his handling of elderly clients' affairs. I wasn't surprised when his BMW screeched into my driveway that evening. What did you do? He demanded, storming into my living room without knocking. I looked up from my knitting, the picture of elderly innocence. Marcus? What's wrong, baby? Don't play dumb. He slapped the letter onto the coffee table. The bar is investigating me. Someone filed a complaint with very specific details about my cases. Details only you knew. I don't understand what you're talking about. I set aside my knitting. Maybe you should sit down. You look upset. Cut the act, Grandma. I know you've been working against me. The donation to that elder protection group, all those questions about my other clients. His voice rose. After everything I've done for you, everything you've done for me? The words escaped before I could stop them, my performance momentarily forgotten. Yes, making sure you're taken care of, protecting your assets. You mean stealing my assets? I stood, dropping the frail elderly act entirely, selling properties from my educational trust, planning to put me in a nursing home while you sell my house. His face went blank with shock, then twisted with anger. You don't know what you're talking about. The dementia is worse than I thought. The cameras you installed, Marcus, they work both ways. I saw you with that real estate developer, planning luxury condos where my house stands. You're confused. Am I confused about the papers I found in your office? The ones showing you sold 2 properties from my trust? Properties meant to fund scholarships for children from our neighborhood? He took a step toward me, voice low and dangerous. You went through my office? Yes. Just like you've gone through my house when I wasn't home. Just like you've lied to my doctor, manipulated my friends, and plotted to take everything I've spent a lifetime building. You ungrateful... He caught himself. You don't understand. I have commitments, financial obligations. That don't justify stealing from your grandmother. I moved closer, looking directly into his eyes. Or from other elderly clients who trusted you. His face darkened. You have no proof of anything. Don't I? I gestured to the ceiling corner where one of his cameras was installed. Every conversation we've had in this house for the past 2 months is recorded, including the one happening right now. Panic flashed across his face. Those recordings wouldn't be admissible? In court? Maybe not, but the Bar Association might find them interesting. So might your senior partners. So might the families of those other elderly clients you've been manipulating. Marcus's composure cracked entirely. You think you're so smart? You're nothing but a washed-up old teacher who doesn't know when it's time to step aside. And you're nothing but a thief in an expensive suit. I needed that money, he shouted. Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain my position? The house, the car, the clothes, it all costs money, money I don't have. So you decided to take mine. How many other elderly people have you convinced to sign away their lives? They're going to lose it all anyway. Half of them can barely remember their own names. At least I put their assets to good use. Just then, Bernadette entered with James and Michael, who had been waiting outside. They'd heard everything. Realizing the seriousness of his situation, Marcus tried to change tactics. This was all a misunderstanding, he said smoothly. Grandma, I was only trying to protect you, to make sure you were properly cared for in your golden years. But there was no going back. The mask had fallen too completely, revealing the stranger beneath. The grandson I'd raised was gone, or perhaps had never truly existed at all. The next 4 months unfolded with the slow, grinding inevitability of legal proceedings. Marcus was placed on administrative leave after the recording of his confession reached his firm's managing partners. The Bar Association expanded its investigation, interviewing other elderly clients with similar complaints. I watched from a painful distance as my grandson's carefully constructed life began to unravel. He hired Stanley Greenberg, a defense attorney known for representing white-collar criminals, who immediately filed motions challenging the admissibility of the recordings and questioning my mental competence. On a cold January morning, we gathered in Judge Calvin Thompson's chambers for a preliminary hearing. As expected, Judge Thompson disclosed his former connection to me. In the interest of complete transparency, I should note that Mrs. Washington was my high school English teacher some 40 years ago, he stated formally. If either party feels this creates a conflict of interest, I will recuse myself from these proceedings. After conferring with their attorneys, both sides agreed to proceed with Judge Thompson presiding, with additional oversight from a judicial panel to ensure impartiality. Marcus sat across the conference table, avoiding my gaze. He'd lost weight, and his once immaculate suit hung slightly loose at the shoulders. Despite everything, my heart ached at the sight. Before we proceed with formal charges, Judge Thompson said, Mrs. Washington has proposed an alternative resolution. Marcus looked up, surprise briefly replacing his carefully neutral expression. James outlined the terms of my offer. Marcus would repay every penny I'd invested in his education, with interest calculated from the date of his law school graduation. He would make restitution to the other elderly clients he had manipulated. He would use his personal funds to repurchase or replace the properties he had improperly sold from my educational trust. In exchange, he would accept a 3-year suspension of his law license rather than permanent disbarment. During this suspension, he would perform 2,000 hours of community service at a legal aid clinic serving low-income seniors. This is extremely generous, Judge Thompson noted, looking directly at Marcus. Considering the evidence, a criminal prosecution could result in significant prison time. Marcus conferred with his attorney in whispers. Greenberg looked surprised, then relieved, then nodded firmly. We need to discuss specifics, Greenberg said. The amount of restitution, the timeline for repayment, the structure of the community service requirement. Of course, James agreed. But we should be clear. This offer is contingent on full cooperation and genuine remorse. Any attempt to minimize the harm done or shift blame will result in immediate withdrawal of the offer. Marcus finally looked at me directly. Why? He asked quietly. Why offer this instead of pursuing charges? Because you're still my grandson, I replied simply. And I still believe there's something worth saving in you. His eyes dropped to the table. The repayment? It would take everything I have. My house, my investments, everything. Yes, I acknowledged, just like your actions would have taken everything from me. As we prepared to leave, I approached Marcus. Up close, I could see the dark circles under his eyes, the strain etched into his face. There's one more condition, I said quietly. Not in the formal agreement, but between you and me. What is it? he asked warily. I want you to tell me why. Not the excuses or justifications. The truth about how my grandson became someone who could do this. He looked away. I don't know if I can answer that. Try. You owe me that much. He was silent for a long moment. I'll think about it. It wasn't the response I'd hoped for, but it was honest. Perhaps the first honest thing he'd said to me in years. 6 months later, Marcus stood awkwardly in my living room, his designer clothes replaced by khakis and a simple button-down shirt. He'd sold his house and car, moved into a one-bedroom apartment, and begun his community service at the newly established Washington Elder Justice Clinic, a free legal resource center for seniors I'd founded with part of the restitution money. The Johnson case is progressing, he said, referring to an elderly woman who'd been exploited by her own son. The judge granted our preliminary injunction. Her son can't access any more of her accounts. I nodded, pouring us both iced tea. That's good news. How is Rose holding up? Better. She's staying with her sister now. He hesitated. She reminds me of you sometimes. Same determination. We sat in uncomfortable silence. These monthly progress meetings were part of our agreement, a way for me to monitor his community service and his personal rehabilitation. You asked me a question, he finally said, 6 months ago, about why I did what I did. I set down my glass carefully. I remember. I've been thinking about it. A lot. He stared into his tea. The easy answer is money. I was drowning in debt. The house, the car, the lifestyle. But that's not the whole truth. He took a deep breath. I started believing I was entitled to more than I had. That my talents, my education, the education you sacrificed for, meant I deserved certain things regardless of whether I'd earned them. When did it start? Small things at first. Padding hours on billing statements, convincing clients to pursue unnecessary legal actions that generated fees. Then, I started working with elderly clients, and I saw opportunity. He practically whispered the last word. They trusted me, respected me. It was so easy. And me? Your own grandmother? He was quiet for a long moment. You were different at first. I compartmentalized, told myself I was genuinely concerned about your welfare. But when I learned about your additional assets, he shook his head. The justifications came easily by then. Are you sorry because you got caught, or because of what you did? I asked. When this started, I was only sorry I got caught, he admitted. Now, I wake up thinking about Rose, about the other clients, about you, about what would have happened to you in that facility while I sold your house and spent your money. His voice cracked. So yes, I'm sorry for what I did. Truly sorry. I reached over and took his hand, the first physical contact we'd had in over a year. That's a start. The following week, I attended a hearing at the legal aid clinic. Marcus was representing Rose Johnson in her case against her son. I sat in the back row, watching as he methodically presented evidence of the son's financial exploitation. Ms. Johnson trusted her son implicitly, Marcus told the judge. She believed, as most parents do, that her child would always act in her best interest. That trust created a fiduciary relationship that her son exploited systematically over 3 years. The irony wasn't lost on me, or on Marcus, whose voice wavered slightly as he continued. After the hearing, which resulted in a favorable ruling for Rose, I watched as the elderly woman hugged my grandson tightly. Thank you for believing me when nobody else would, she told him. Something in Marcus's face changed as he awkwardly returned her embrace. It wasn't dramatic, just a softening around the eyes, a glimpse of the compassionate boy I'd raised. That evening, Marcus called me unexpectedly. I wanted to tell you something, he said. After the hearing today, Rose asked me why I chose to work with elderly clients. I told her the truth, that I'd exploited people like her and was making amends. That must have been difficult, I said. It was. But then she said something that I can't stop thinking about. His voice grew thick. She said, then you understand better than most what we're facing. I smiled into the phone, tears forming. She's right. Sometimes our greatest failures can become our greatest strengths if we're brave enough to face them honestly. I don't know if I'll ever make this right, Grandma. Making it right isn't a destination, Marcus. It's a direction. You just keep moving that way, one day at a time. After we hung up, I sat on my porch swing, watching the sunset over the neighborhood that had been my home for 50 years. The house that Marcus had nearly taken from me now stood as a symbol of resilience, and perhaps of redemption too. 1 year later, I stood at the podium in the renovated community center on Chicago's South Side. Before me, a crowd gathered for the dedication of the expanded Washington Elder Justice Clinic, a free legal resource center for seniors facing exploitation or abuse. 40 years ago, I taught in a classroom just 2 blocks from where we stand today, I began. I told my students that education was the key to transformation, both personal and communal. Today, I'm proud to see that principle in action. From my position at the podium, I could see Marcus in the back row. He looked different, thinner, with a closely cropped beard and simpler clothes. He worked at the clinic full-time now, using his legal training to help the very people he once exploited. The transformation hadn't been immediate or easy. The first 3 months after our agreement, he had performed his community service with minimal engagement, showing up, doing what was required, leaving promptly. The change began with Rose Johnson's case. Seeing her vulnerability, so similar to my own, had forced Marcus to confront the real impact of his actions. He began staying late to work on her case, researching obscure legal precedents, finding creative approaches to recover her assets. After my speech, the clinic's director presented Marcus with a certificate marking his 2,000 hours of community service, the completion of his formal obligation. To everyone's surprise, including mine, Marcus took the microphone. "I came to this clinic as part of a legal settlement," he said, his voice steady. "I was required to be here because I had violated the trust of elderly clients, including my own grandmother, who stands before you today." A murmur went through the crowd. "What began as punishment has become purpose," he continued. "This past year, I've worked with over 50 seniors who experienced financial exploitation. Their courage in fighting back taught me more than 3 years of law school ever did." He paused, looking directly at me. "I'm grateful to announce that I've accepted a permanent position as staff attorney here at the clinic, not because I have to, but because I choose to." Tears blurred my vision as the room erupted in applause. This wasn't the future I'd imagined for my grandson. The prestigious firm, the corner office, the accolades from powerful people. But perhaps it was the future he needed, one built on humility, service, and genuine restitution. Later, at the reception, Marcus approached me with a small box. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it." Inside was a key, the key to my house, which he'd made copies of years ago to access my home when I wasn't there. "It's the last one," he said quietly. "I had others made, for when I was planning to sell your house." I closed my hand around the key. "Thank you for returning it. I have something else for you too." He handed me an envelope containing a check, the final payment of his restitution, 3 months ahead of schedule. I've been taking extra legal translation work on weekends to pay it off faster. That evening, I hosted a small dinner at my house, the house that remained mine, that would continue to be mine as long as I chose. Bernadette, Judge Thompson, Denise, Michael, and James joined us. As I looked around my dining table at these friends who had stood by me through the darkest moments, I felt a profound gratitude. At 74, I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed and connections deeper than I'd imagined. Marcus sat somewhat apart, still finding his place in this reconstituted circle. The road had been long for him, rebuilding his life, his career, his integrity from the ground up. "To second chances," I said, raising my glass, "and to the wisdom to recognize when they're deserved." Around the table, glasses rose in response. After a moment's hesitation, Marcus raised his as well, his eyes meeting mine with a mixture of shame and hope that suggested my grandson, the real Marcus, not the man ambition had twisted him into, might still be in there after all, finding his way back to the light. The next morning, I sat on my porch with my coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up. Children walked to school along the same sidewalks where Marcus had once played. Elderly neighbors tended gardens they'd cultivated for decades. I thought about the educational trust Marcus had restored, which would now help those children attend college. I thought about the clinic that would protect those elderly neighbors from exploitation. And I thought about my grandson, who had fallen so far and was now, step by step, climbing back toward the light. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. "Just met with a new client. 82-year-old retired bus driver whose nephew emptied his bank accounts. Reminds me of Mr. Wilson who used to drive our route, working on a way to recover his savings. Thought you'd want to know." I smiled as I texted back. "Mr. Wilson would be proud of you. So am I." The justice I'd sought wasn't about punishment after all. It was about restoration, of assets, yes, but more importantly, of purpose, of integrity, of the capacity to do good in a world that too often rewards the worst in us. And in that restoration, I found my own healing. The betrayal would always be part of our story, but now, so was redemption. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and share your story in the comments. Your journey might inspire another queen.